My dear sister, and greetings to all the fellow participants and panelists that we have today. Firstly, let me express my appreciation to the organizers, being the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation, and of course, the African Union Commission's Department of Human Resources, Science and Technology for inviting me to be part of this webinar as a panelist. Program Director, I would briefly share South Africa's response to COVID-19, as all of us never saw it coming. And indeed, when it hit us, it exposed us to the real challenges that we didn't even think that far about. Key to this was a need for all governments and citizens to come up with a coherent strategy first to say how are we going to combat the negative impact of COVID, but most importantly, how do we make sure that we minimize the spread of COVID amongst our people? And I did mention earlier that at the center of all of this is to make sure that we give communication to our people. Because if as leadership of any country, you're going to ask people to do certain things, especially when there's an outbreak of a disease, people get to panic. They don't know if they're not going to lose their lives. They don't know if government hospitals are ready for them, including the private industry. And therefore, as the minister responsible for communications and digital technologies, ours was to make sure that firstly, we create an enabling environment for remote working. Secondly, we've got to make sure that through all the communication platforms that we have access to, our people are able to access information. Hence, in March, we therefore released the directives which afforded not only the industry to say, we do appreciate that President has called for a lockdown. Everyone has to work from home. Although we never anticipated that as government, we've been deploying broadband infrastructure to public buildings. We never anticipated that people one day will not be able to utilize those buildings, and therefore they will have to work from home. Same applies to the industry. They never anticipated that the quality of bandwidth that they've provided to the rural areas and actually homes may therefore one day be a challenge to people that must utilize the services, because as you are aware, most of them focus on the profit-driven areas, the suburbia, government buildings and all that. Therefore, the first thing was to say, through the regulator, we have to make sure that we avail a temporal spectrum so that we minimize that high impact of traffic in the work that is being done by the operators. So as we did this, we needed to make sure that we balance both the lives of our people and the livelihoods at the same time. The state has to remain productive because people must still be able to have food. People must still be able to have access to education or healthcare services. And at the center of that was us making sure that as government, we establish the National Command Center that must therefore establish work streams to look into the different components that we deemed very necessary in order to combat the spread of COVID in our country. We have to look into the human rights issue, we have to look at the socio-economic impact, but most importantly, we have to look at that matters most, to say, how would we give an opportunity to all to showcase or come forward with whatever solutions that they have to make sure that we can defeat COVID-19 that has attacked us. When we imposed curfews across the country, people were panicking. We restricted physical attendance of learning at learning institutions, and we mobilized medical resources to support targeted responses across the country. We set up mobile hospitals with larger capacities in order to treat patients. We had to make funds available, including going to an extent of extending the social grants which we supply to the needy in our country in order to take care of the indigent communities and workers that are mostly affected by the reduced economic activity across the country. At the center of this was the information campaigns on preventative measures against infection that we launched nationwide. As evident from the measures that I've alluded to above, communication strategies and access to information by committees was essential in order to ensure the access of the first strategy of the national response to the COVID-19 pandemic. As a minister responsible for communications and digital technologies, again, I had to make sure that I harness and bring everybody in the sector in order to come and share with us what strategies and innovations that we can employ in order to create that remote working, but also promote good livelihoods. We established an ICT workstream wherein we invited all industry players to come and share, innovate, and key to that, as I said, we had to make sure that the state remains productive. Therefore, it meant that Parliament must still function as it needs to function. Committees, so that government can be able to take critical decisions, and at the same time, committees must also be functional. So one first thing that we did was to reach out to our industry. Please give us access to remote working, allow Parliament to operate virtually, and it means certain laws had to be passed immediately or rules had to be changed just to accommodate that. We needed to make sure that we boost the economy, and one way of doing that, we established the Solidarity Fund. I mentioned earlier that we extended the social grants to those that are unemployed and needy, but on top of that, we also, with the Department of Social Development, we provided food parcels, which were not only provided by the state, because one great thing that South Africa has experienced in this COVID is that when we work together, we can do more. When we are able to coordinate our efforts, we're able to collaborate for effective execution. And that has been done very well. One of our agencies, the Postal Office at the South African Post Services, was responsible also for the distribution of grants countrywide. And people are sitting at home, Program Direct. That tells you there's going to be lots of fights. That tells you that people are going to be bored. We're going to see depression levels increasing. And in order to curb that, ours was to say, how do we then work with the Department of Arts and Culture that has a responsibility to entertain, amongst other things. And we worked with them because we had provided trainings to young people as part of building a capable fourth industrial revolution arm in South Africa, wherein we train people on digital content development, amongst others. And now working together with the arts and culture, we then had lots of young people who were creating content and availing it online. They were able to have some shows, and at least it minimized the impact of people who were just sitting watching the normal, as we also have seen through the broadcasting industries that those that are responsible for the creative industries could not go because we have put everybody on lockdown. Now, if you're putting everybody on lockdown, it tells you that those companies that are production companies also have to stop working. We had to identify essential services and limit the numbers of people that could work and different areas that indeed were essential. So the emergence of this creative industry that occupied the digital platforms was something that we saw as an opportunity that gave people not only economic outcomes, but also it got to entertain and educate others. Key to this, of course, is ensuring that we establish the coronavirus online website, which was responsible to generate daily reports on diagnosis, recoveries and deaths in the country. And the platform provides our citizens with useful and practical information and support. Most people have been visiting the website and it's so effective. Medical practitioners were expected to report into this platform electronically. They shared their observations with the National Health Department. Information in turn was provided and was used to generate epidemiological curves for the whole country and for each province separately. We got data scientists that were then data analysts to assist in terms of mining the data and analyzing it in order to make sure that the response that we provide is real but also can be responsive. And government was working with all its own components together with the private sector and the communities in order to say, South Africa, you can do it. And if you can do it, it means we've got to hold each other's hand. You play your part, I play my part in order to make sure that we remain safe. But what we never anticipated was the different ways in which the online platforms, for example, the text messaging, were used to report cases of gender-based violence. We did not see that. And as people are sitting at home, we saw an increased level to gender-based violence because now we had the operators that have zero-rated certain platforms. We had to report fake news was that causes panic, amongst other things. And now as people get to report these violences, then it therefore said, government, now we've got to shift focus. You were only looking at COVID, but there is this emerging pandemic also that is of human error, if it's an error or it's human made, because I don't know what causes people to be violent. Maybe it's mistakes, it's how they grow up, or it's the way they react, but it tells you that it's something that cannot be acceptable. And through this, it really exposed once more our poor infrastructure. I've spoken about the interventions that we tried to introduce, and if you listen to me, most of them were technological based. And whether we're going to be talking about online streaming, whether we're talking about the services that the industry was rendering, but we had managed to make people to be digital outcasts, not out of their own making. And this, therefore, that put pressure in government and the private sector to say, we've been talking about connecting the unconnected. And COVID has really exposed us to these harsh realities that we're not treating our people equally. There are those that are still discriminated because of where they are. Therefore, as government, we've got to improve on how we then invest in digital infrastructure services so that our people can have access in the ecosystem. Because as much as we said zero rate, these other people didn't have smartphones. Other people struggled with network itself. Others could not even have the devices to access the virtual education that we try to intervene with. But as I said, this was a learning that helped us to say, now we see where we have failed, or we see where the next economy is driven. And therefore, as we talk about the economic reforms during the COVID period, key to that, government has agreed that at the center is provision of connectivity to all people of South Africa. I must say, colleagues and beautiful women, that as a country, we were resilient in fighting the spread of the virus. Up to date, we have about 90% recovery rate on patients diagnosed with COVID-19. The lockdown indeed helped. Our medical professions' responsiveness were important interventions in driving down the spread of the virus. And as I said earlier, this we did because of the collective action that we embarked on. From our side as communications and digital technologies, it has really brought the sector together, because you would have noted that most governments, us included, when we made legislations, when we developed policies, we were inward looking. Now it forced us to say, you don't make a policy for yourself, you're making a policy for the state. Everybody must be able to realize the strategic intent of your policy or the economic perspective of your policy. And therefore, it therefore means that certain things we've got to relax and not put pressure from ourselves as governments, because we can't afford everything. We've got to work together with the private sector. And as I said, COVID really enhanced our collaboration with the industry, that to date, as I'm speaking to you, there are certain things that we say the industry will take care of. Ours is to create an enabling environment for them to go to these areas that I said were not connected. And we are about to, of course, release spectrum through our regulator, which we also believe will help minimize the impact of the digital divide. And we had then agreed with other departments and the private sector on the need to promote local innovations. As much as we appreciate that we operate in a global platform, but those innovations must still have the South African and African character, which talks to us, including the importance of using our local languages. Wherever we're deploying drones, wherever we're deploying robotics or artificial intelligence, looking into the ethics also of the algorithms by those that are programming is something that we said we've got to pay attention to it. We've seen, like now, if you look at the likes of Facebook, even if you making an example, if you look at the list of people that get to invite you or send you friend requests, if you are black, it's totally black people. And that talks to some of the things that we never pay attention to, but we believe that now it's high time that we look at it. If you look at the spread of the virus in terms of the numbers that are given, you find that still you find those that they still exist whereby they discriminative against certain skin and certain colors. And we are saying working with yourselves in order to drive the digital transformation that was adopted by the AU. We believe that we can take Africa to a better continent, and of course utilizing contact tracing as one of the interventions, but bearing in mind that we have a responsibility to protect the people's information. And that's our story, Program Director. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Madam Minister, my dear sister. Thank you so much for that, and congratulations. I think let me, from myself and from the African Union Development Agency and the organizers, to congratulate the government for the marvelous work you've done in communication. I work from South Africa, and it has been really, information flow has been just there. What you want to know about the pandemic, using all different platforms that the government has set up through your ministry. I think it was